Good day, truth seekers, and welcome to the second part of how evolutionary reasoning works. Today we are going to cover 5 more points, and we have already covered 5 points in part 1. And going through and understanding those 10 points, you should be able to go through scientific research or listen to explainers or even lectures from evolutionists and be able to focus on the facts and not be deceived by preconceptions or pitfalls that typically occur in these areas. So, let's go. Now, the sixth point is what I would call mysticism. It is a little bit funny to use this word when discussing a theory that claims that it is all scientific and all natural, no supernatural things involved. But really, this is what happens in the theory. So, whenever the theory stumbles on a stage in the evolutionary path that it wants to establish, and this stage is a gap that cannot be, intelligible, then the theory would insert this thing that it will call a proto-something or primordial something or a common ancestor in the path. And this thing is something that you cannot observe, you cannot test, you cannot repeat, and it's typically unfalsifiable. It is there, and it is there because the theory just stays that it's there. Somebody's hypothesizing that it is there. So let's look at some examples. So, for example, when you look at the step prior to biological evolution, which is chemical synthesis and abiogenesis, the DNA molecule is pretty complicated. So there is no path to jump from the raw minerals to DNA. So they would say, okay, there was prior to that an RNA world hypothesis, and the RNA started from very simple RNA and then it jumped to DNA. But still, this jump is so difficult. So they invent this thing called a protocell, where you will invoke, a simple cell membrane with some little genetic material inside there, which might be RNA. And then there will be a step where there is a simple kind of DNA that nobody has ever witnessed. And then, magically, the protocell will become a prokaryote. And since the path from a prokaryote to a eukaryote is also something that nobody can imagine. So there would be this invention of what you would find the theory calling a proto-eukaryote, for example, or somebody inventing a hypothesis that a prokaryote engulfed, like in this drawing, engulfed an aerobic bacterium inside, and then this bacterium had an endosymbiotic relationship with the bigger cell, and then it became mitochondria or any other organelle. And then magically you now have a proto-eukaryote and then a eukaryote. And when you start from a prokaryote and there is no path to multicellularity by gradual evolution, then somebody will invent this idea that, okay, eukaryote formed eukaryotic colonies, and then the colonies magically changed into multicellular organisms, but there is no path. And then the big one, which is this common ancestor myth. So somebody says, how come we have humans? So somebody else says, well, the theory says that humans came from, less advanced primates. So what are the less advanced primates that are around us? We see chimpanzees, we see apes, we see orangutans, etc. So are they those? Because we know that those cannot become the humans, because those are 48 chromosomes and we are 46 chromosomes, and there is this huge difference. So there is no path. And then you would see images like this where you will have all those gaps. So there is this, if you look at the cursor, there is this extinct common ancestor for the orangutans, for the gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. And here you will have the orangutan, and then the branch will branch upwards. And then we have the gorillas, but we are not directly with gorillas. So there is another extinct common ancestor between us and gorillas. and chimpanzees, and then you have another jump, and there is another extinct common ancestor of chimpanzees and bonobos, and you go here, the chimpanzees and bonobos branch from here, and then you have the humans, and you will have here other branches all over the place for Neanderthals, etc. And then you tell somebody humans didn't come from chimpanzees. Somebody will, but I didn't say that humans came from chimpanzees. They came from a common ancestor between us and chimpanzees, which was preceded by a common ancestor between us and gorillas, which was preceded by a common ancestor between us and orangutans, etc. And this is not a way to lead a sensible discussion, because the theory cannot just be built on myths and unfalsifiable artifacts that the theory is inventing all over the place. 99% of the theory are things that are not there so that we can test. And then it is claimed that this is a theory. And this is not only in the evolution path of humans, it is almost in every single evolution path of any living organism. You will not find a tree that will show you that this creature came exactly from this one, so you can check and look at the DNA of this one and the DNA of that one and see the very clear direct relationships coming on the genetic level. You cannot do that. And then they claim that evolution is observable and there is so much evidence. Sorry guys, there isn't any evidence. There are myths that you are placing all over the place. From in the big stages, like the move from minerals to organic chemicals to RNA to protocell to a prokaryote to a eukaryote, this is a series of gaps. Not just one gap. It's a series of gaps. And then when you start from the eukaryotes or the prokaryotes and try to trace this tree of life, it is a big gap with very small, it's like the sky, very small dots that we call the stars, and the rest is dark. So, and then at the end, it is called a theory of evolution. So, once again, in so many discussions where you are talking to people, and there is so many evidence. You see, there is this gradual thing. Yes, there is this gradual thing that you claim, but you cannot show. It is not observable. It is full of missing, extinct, totally unseen ancestors. And then when there is a one fossil that is a tooth or a little bone that doesn't have DNA, then you have a festival. We have a fossil. And then this is not how theories work, and this is not how science works. That you have 1 of 1,000 or 1 of 1,000,000 of the evidence that you should have, and then you call this evidence, and you call this a theory that has plenty of evidence. Set aside the paradoxes and the other things that we are going to go through. So this was our 6th point that we call mysticism. So watch out for mysticism when you're reading a scientific paper. When they say this creature came from that one, there will be further explanation that there was a common ancestor, and you will find that it's typically extinct, and you cannot find it to test this hypothesis. The 7th point is contradictions or paradoxes. The theory is full of them, all over the place. This argument is made to solve this problem, and exactly the reverse argument is made in another problem, as if it's two disconnected worlds. I'm giving here a simple example. So, for example, the theory would tell you the ancestors of that specific creature are not there. You ask why? It said because this one is more fit than its ancestors, so the ancestors perished. So you ask, why are there still ape-like creatures while humans are the pinnacle of the evolution of the ape-like or hominin tree? It said, well, we never said that the ancestors have to perish, because if somebody is even more fit, it doesn't mean that the less fit will perish. Okay. And then, for example, you are looking at the problem, the very big problem of the emergence of multicellular organisms. And you ask, there is the single cell organism and there is the multicell organism, and there should be in between millions or billions of species, regardless which path it took. It took the path of 1 cell to 2 cell to 3 cell to 4 cell, or it took the path of 1 cell to colonies, and then the colonies went into gradual changes to form multicellular organisms. Both paths, I say, are impossible. But let's look at the evidence. Show me the transitions. But there is no transitions. Show me the fossils of the transitions. There is no fossils of the transitions. Where are they? They perished. They got extinct. Why did they go extinct? Well, maybe that the few cell or the transitional forms between the colonies and the multicellular organisms were not so fit, so they perished. Guys, you have just said and asserted many times that it doesn't come as a consequence that the successors, the descended species, will mean that the ancestors will perish. Now we are looking at a problem where there should be billions of species, and you are claiming that all of them perished because of fitness. And this is not the only paradox. This theory is full of paradoxes. If you turn any rock, you find a paradox underneath. And when you are looking at the papers or the literature of evolution, just write down the arguments. This issue, the argument is like this. And when you go to further issues, just look back in the arguments that you have written before. You will find contradictions after contradictions after contradictions. And theories do have contradictions, by the way. It is not the only theory on the face of the earth that there will be part of the theory where there is a paradox or a contradiction. But when the theory is full of them, among the other problems, typically theories that are this way, they go away. They are filed. They are put on the shelf. You start looking for a theory that makes sense. But this one, no, it stays. So let's go to the next one. Now, the 8th point is what I call extrapolations, but they are really excessive extrapolations. And the theory is full of them. Essentially, the whole thing about the theory is that it is an extrapolation. I'll give you 2 examples here. We talked about the multicellular organism example in various aspects of this presentation. So I'll jump to the second example, which is the excessive and completely unacceptable extrapolation between what is adaptation and what is evolution of species. So he will tell you, look at these finches. Look at how the beaks changed. Look at how their sounds changed. So the new finch will not anymore interbreed with the other finch because, they have different sounds in mating, etc. Okay, guys, this is adaptation, and it is a very observable phenomena. We know why it happens. We have understood about epigenetics. We understand that genes and gene pools have all those kinds of alleles that can be expressed under certain environmental conditions and under stress, and this is completely okay. And then somebody will say, look, didn't you see that these adaptations happen? Then this is what also happens and what has made a lizard change into a bird. Guys, no, because the mechanism here is completely different from the mechanism here. These are genes that already exist and that are expressed through epigenetic mechanisms. But these are random mutations that you claim are happening completely in random and then are acted upon by natural selection to produce what? To produce completely different functions, completely different body plans, completely different organisms. An organism that has gills versus an organism that has a lung. An organism that walks versus an organism that flies. An organism that sees versus an organism that uses a sonar or something. An organism that uses electrical waves even to sense underwater or whatever its environment is. Completely different. And then you say, well, I have shown you the adaptation. Why don't you accept that adaptations can be extrapolated to evolution? Because it is not the same thing. It's 1%, and then again, you have the 1% and the 1,000 step journey, and you have the first 1 of 1,000, and you want me to accept the 999? I might consider to accept 1 more or 2 more steps, but given that it is the same mechanism, and I'm saying this mechanism can extend, but you are moving me from one mechanism to a completely different mechanism, from one discipline to a completely different discipline, from one body plan to a completely different body plan. It doesn't work this way. And then somebody says, well, it is observable. We have seen under the microscope or in the lab that, this single cell organism has formed a colony. And then why not the colony will become, because it's completely different that a colony arises from single cell organisms that will sit together versus a colony merging together, 1,000 individuals merging together and specializing and forming tissues and organs and becoming a multicellular organism that has a single identity. It's completely a different thing. This extrapolation is not acceptable whatsoever. It is not an extrapolation even. And I have made this small icon. You will see these circular icons all over the presentation, and we will be using them when we are reading together research papers and responding to science explainer videos later. So when there is something that refers to one of those points, I will put the icon so you know what we're talking about here. And this is our point about extrapolations. Let's go to the next one. Now, the ninth point is what I would call circular reasoning. And this is really a painful one because you find it popping up in discussions, in pop culture discussions with scientific explainers, and unfortunately in articles. And it goes like this. So we have all the observations that we can see. What are the observations? That there are very obvious similarities between living creatures, while there is also diversity. So we see that we're all, flesh and blood, we are water-based, we have genetic material, we have skeletons, we have exoskeletons for some other animals. Our chemical composition is proteins and etc. is quite similar, but you have all those different phenotypes. You have all different body plans. So there is the similarity and there is the diversity and there is the geodiversity. So this is the observation, and we need an explanation for the observation. So somebody says, okay, I have an explanation. It is evolution. My theory is there is evolution. Okay, give us evidence. And then you are going on a discussion with somebody and he says, okay, as if he had a kind of amnesia or something, the evidence for evolution is that this animal and this animal seem to have common descent. Okay, what is your evidence for this common descent? Don't you see the similarity between them? Well, so what? The similarity is the initial observation. You have the initial observation and you want to make an explanation for it. You cannot prove that the explanation is correct on the basis that the observation itself exists, because then you have just made a full circle. You have proven nothing. And then somebody says, okay, look at those fossils. What is the issue with the fossils? Look, we find a fossil. It's tiktaalik. What's the problem with the tiktaalik? Okay, it looks to be a transitionary state between fish and, amphibians and terrestrial creatures. Okay, so there is a similarity between something that lives in water, something that is in the middle, and something that is on land. This was the whole point from the beginning, that we are wondering how come this similarity with diversity is there. You cannot just keep doing those full circles. And then somebody else comes and says, okay, look at this. Chimpanzees look like humans. Maybe they have common descent. Okay, what's your proof? Look, we have the genetic material. There is similarity between them. Well, what else do you expect? Chimpanzees and humans, in terms of their phenotypes, in terms of the way they look, in terms of their physical appearance, there are similarities. So if you look into the genetic material, there is expected to be similarities. You have just gone another full circle. You start from the very observation, which is that there is similarity. You theorize that the explanation is the theory, and then when I ask you for the evidence, you say that the evidence is the similarity. The observation cannot be used as the evidence for the theory. And this happens over and over again. When you want to prove a theory, you do not get back to the original observation. And you need to be very wary about this when you are reading articles or papers, and when you are having discussions. It is a typical discussion to have this with somebody who believes in evolution. And I asked the people who believe in evolution, guys, look into the scientific method. It's not rocket science that we're telling here. And now our 10th and final point today, which I call Homo confusion. And by that, I mean the confusion, again, between homoplasy and homology and using evidence in improper context. And this is really a resultant and a convergence of few of the points that we have mentioned. And what I mean here is, homology is similarity due to common descent, and homoplasy is just similarity. And for example, when you see two people in the street and they look like each other, you cannot just immediately assume that they have the same father or the same grandfather. One of them, let's say, is an Indian, another one is, a Caucasian. You cannot say that they're looking alike because they have the same father or the same grandfather. But if you know that those two guys share a common mother or a common grandmother or a common father or a common grandfather, you can say, look how they look alike. It is because of inheritance. And this is exactly the thing. Homoplasy, which is similarity in shape, does not lead to homology, which is similarity due to common descent, unless you first establish ancestry. So if, for example, we are looking at breeding of dogs or cows or whatever other animal that we breed, and we can then say that those are all dogs, there is similarity between this kind of dog and that kind of dog because it has come from breeding and there is a common ancestry between them. We can say that because we know that it is established science, we did it ourselves, or we know somebody else did it, and then, in this case, homoplasy leads to homology. But when we are looking at the product of not established science, the product of random mutation and natural selection, which is called speciation due to chaotic, unguided, unintended, purposeless processes of nature, which is totally unestablished and there is totally no evidence for it, and then you tell me that a bird is coming from a raptor because there is these similarities between them. No, it is not. Because you did not establish that they have common ancestry, and you did not establish that your mechanism actually works. And we cannot just keep on doing those circular references. And this thing is used over and over and over and over again, erroneously, out of context, without evidence, and against the assertions of established science. So it's very important for you as a researcher, as somebody who looks into the papers, as somebody who listens to explainers. When you ask somebody, where is the evidence? And he says, there is huge amount of evidence. There are thousands. There is no thousands of evidence. You are referring to the original observations of similarity and calling them evidence. But you did not establish the common ancestry in the first place. You are just extrapolating what you have from adaptations and breeding and inheritance and epigenetics, which is established science, into a completely uncharted territory. And what you have as established, which did not need the theory of evolution altogether, is the one of 1,000, and you keep extrapolating to the 999. It's the same story happening over and over and over again. From the thing about avians until the thing about apes and chimpanzees and humans. The hominin myth, the hominin fiction, the hominin figment of imagination. So, finally, I call again upon everybody who is working in this field, either as a dedicated researcher, an explainer, somebody who is interested in it, to take care of those points, to be fair to yourself and to be fair to your audience. Because at the end, truth will prevail, no matter what this person or that person does. Truth at the end will prevail. So I hope you have enjoyed this part and the previous one, and that you will make benefit of what we have mentioned while you are reading evolutionary research papers or articles or books or magazines, or even listening to science explainers or lecturers. And actually, after the first part, I have had all those discussions in the comment section of the video and in the comment sections of other videos with many of the channel audience. And some of them who are evolution proponents, they tell me, well, I cannot say that they have really disagreed that these things occur in the evolutionary context, but they justify them. They say we do this because we think this way. So I've decided I will make an episode about those justifications, which is essentially an episode about the underlying belief system of the evolutionary researchers and thinkers. And I'm inviting you to put your comments under this video and even discuss this matter of what is justification, why are evolutionary thinkers thinking this way and making these things in their research and in their literature. So until then, make sure that you have subscribed, clicked your notifications button, like this video, share it with those who are interested with the topic, and have truth, peace, and happiness in your life until we meet again. Thank you.